March 14, 2011. What began as an ordinary day in Jacksonville, Florida, would soon spiral into tragedy. By 5:30 p.m., the life of a young family would change forever. 2-year-old David Galaraga arrived at St. Luke's Hospital, lifeless and unresponsive. His small frame showed signs of trauma, bruises, swelling, and injuries far more severe than his mother's explanation could justify. Bonella Susanna, mi qua David, keng din dua tre de na tu joang tang soang kai dang choi voi on chiem qua min. En hung kai kak bacsi bat dao kam niyum, ho tsang lo lang han. En hung vet thuang qua David kong kop voi ka chiem. Among the medical staff, a grim realization began to settle. The extent of David's injuries suggested something far worse than a simple fall. Out of caution, hospital staff contacted the police. Detectives arrived to investigate what was quickly becoming a deeply suspicious case. So, tell us what happened. Start from the beginning. He was climbing on the bunk bed. I was in the kitchen when I heard a loud thud. When I ran in, he was on the floor, unresponsive. But Bonella's explanation raised more questions than answers. The timeline seemed shaky, and her demeanor was oddly detached. Meanwhile, officers searched the family's modest 2-bedroom apartment for clues. What they found painted a troubling picture. In the children's shared bedroom, blood was found on the floor near the bottom bunk, as well as on a school backpack and nearby baby wipes. Vomit stains were visible on the bedding, and more red marks were discovered in the bathroom, smeared across the shower curtain. Back at the hospital, doctors identified multiple injuries inconsistent with a simple fall. David's skull was fractured, his nose broken, and there were bruises on his arms and legs. His right forearm was swollen, possibly fractured, and his eyes were swollen with visible hematomas. The injuries told a story of prolonged trauma, one that didn't match Bonella's account. Detectives now faced a daunting question: was this a tragic accident, or something far more sinister? With the evidence mounting, detectives pressed Bonella for the truth. Under questioning, her story began to change. You said you were in the kitchen when this happened. Is that true? Well, no, I had stepped out. I went to the ATM. Christian, my oldest, was watching the kids. It was a startling admission. Bonella had left her 12-year-old son, Christian, in charge of his younger siblings while she ran errands. Time was of the essence. David's life hung in the balance, and the investigation had only begun to scratch the surface. The focus now shifted to Christian, the only other person in the room when David was injured. Would the 12-year-old reveal the truth about what happened to his younger brother, or would the web of lies only deepen? At the heart of this unfolding tragedy was Christian Fernandez, David's older brother. As detectives questioned him, Christian's demeanor was quiet, almost numb. Yet behind his detached appearance, emotions simmered just beneath the surface. Christian, we just want to understand what happened. Were you home when David got hurt? I was home. I didn't mean for him to get hurt. Christian's words were halting, his voice trembling. But even in these early moments, cracks began to form in the story he and his mother had told. While Bonella claimed she was in the kitchen during David's fall, Christian hesitantly suggested something different. According to Christian, his mother hadn't been in the kitchen as she claimed. In fact, she hadn't even been home. Christian admitted he'd been left alone to care for his siblings while Bonella ran errands. So your mom wasn't home? What did you do when David got hurt? I put him on the bed. I tried to help him. Christian described carrying David to the bottom bunk after the toddler fell. He said he tried to comfort him, hoping his younger brother would wake up. But as detectives pressed for more details, the gaps in his story grew wider. Christian's demeanor shifted as the interview progressed. His answers became more fragmented, his tone more uncertain. Each pause, each hesitation hinted at a deeper truth he wasn't ready to share. "Christian, we're here to help. But we need you to tell us everything. What happened after David fell?" I don't remember. I called my mom." Meanwhile, investigators reviewed Bonella's account of the events. Her claim that David had fallen from the bunk bed while she was in the kitchen was now in question. The inconsistencies between her story and Christian's version of events only deepened the mystery. As detectives pieced together the timeline, it became clear that Bonella hadn't been honest. Surveillance footage from a nearby ATM confirmed she wasn't even in the apartment at the time of the incident. She had left Christian to watch over his 3 younger siblings. Christian had been placed in an impossible position, a child himself, forced to shoulder the responsibilities of a parent. And on that fateful day, the pressure had become too much to bear. "I didn't mean to hurt him. I didn't mean to." But was Christian telling the full story? Or was he holding back, too afraid to reveal the extent of what had happened? "Christian, I need you to be honest with me. You're not in trouble, we just need to know what really happened to David." I got mad. In that moment, Christian's quiet admission sent a chill through the room. It was the first crack in the wall of silence he had built around himself, a hint that the truth was far darker than anyone had imagined. The physical evidence found in the apartment painted a grim picture. Bloodstains near the bunk bed and smeared on various objects suggested a struggle far more violent than a simple fall. Investigators knew they needed to push further to uncover the truth. Left alone in the room, Christian's stoic facade began to crack. The weight of his guilt and fear was almost palpable. He had been carrying a secret too heavy for his young shoulders, and the time to reveal it was drawing near. "I didn't mean to hurt him. I just wanted him to stop crying." To understand what led to the events of March 14th, investigators looked deeper into the family's past, a history defined by trauma, neglect, and instability. Bonella Susanna became a mother when she was just 11 years old, the product of a childhood steeped in poverty and chaos. Her own upbringing was marred by instability, moving in and out of foster care and the homes of strangers. Substance abuse plagued her household, leaving her ill-equipped to care for herself, let alone a child. Christian, her firstborn, entered the world under dire circumstances. His early years were shaped by neglect and hardship. Bonella struggled to provide stability, and the family often lived in substandard conditions. When Christian was just a toddler, authorities found him wandering naked in a parking lot while his grandmother, who was supposed to be watching him, was discovered intoxicated in a nearby motel. The baby bottle she'd left for him was infested with worms. After the incident, both Bonella and Christian entered foster care, but life did not improve. At 15, Bonella gave birth to her second child and moved in with Luis Galaraga Blanco, the man who would become her husband and the father of her 3 youngest children, including David. But behind closed doors, Luis brought violence and fear into the household. His explosive temper often turned toward Christian, who bore the brunt of his rage. In 2010, Christian was hospitalized after Luis punched him in the face so hard it caused a torn retina. The injury required surgery, leaving Christian physically and emotionally scarred. When school officials noticed Christian's swollen face and bruises, they alerted the authorities. Police were dispatched to the home, but before they could make an arrest, Luis took his own life in front of his family. Christian, just 11 years old at the time, witnessed the aftermath of his stepfather's suicide. The trauma left him deeply shaken, but the violence didn't end there. After Luis's death, Bonella was left to care for her 4 children on her own. Already overwhelmed, she relied heavily on Christian to help with his younger siblings. Christian was forced to take on the role of caregiver, a responsibility far beyond his years. At 12, he was expected to supervise his siblings, cook meals, and keep the household running while Bonella worked or ran errands. The cycle of neglect and violence took a toll on Christian. His teachers described him as withdrawn, often staring blankly at his desk during class. Though quiet, he showed signs of anger bubbling just beneath the surface. At school, Christian rarely spoke about his home life. But his drawings, dark, violent images of people fighting or crying, hinted at the pain he was carrying. David Galaraga was born into this fractured family in 2008. Though Bonella tried to provide for her youngest child, the pressure of raising 4 children as a single mother only deepened the cracks in their already fragile foundation. As the eldest sibling, Christian bore much of the burden. He often cared for David, feeding him, changing his diapers, and putting him to bed. But the constant stress of responsibility and unresolved trauma created a dangerous mix. Christian's anger began to manifest in small, troubling ways, snapping at his siblings, slamming doors, or withdrawing completely for hours at a time. Bonella dismissed these behaviors as typical teenage rebellion, unaware of the storm brewing within him. Behind his quiet exterior, Christian was grappling with years of pain, neglect, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. The weight of his past, and the responsibilities thrust upon him, were becoming too much to bear. By March 2011, the Fernandez family was teetering on the edge. The unaddressed trauma, the cycle of violence, and the crushing weight of responsibility had created a volatile environment, one where tragedy was all but inevitable. Christian was a child trying to survive in impossible circumstances. But the events that would unfold next would reveal the devastating consequences of a family pushed beyond its limits. Investigators arrived at the Fernandez family's home to examine the scene where the tragic incident had unfolded. What they found would raise even more questions about Bonella's story. Bloodstains were discovered on the carpet beside the bunk bed where David had allegedly fallen. Additional stains were found on blankets, a baby wipe, and even a school backpack. Nearby, vomit was smeared across the floor, a grim indicator of the toddler's deteriorating condition. The evidence suggested more than a simple fall. It pointed to a violent struggle, one far more severe than Bonella had described. In the bathroom, detectives found further troubling signs. Red marks smeared across the shower curtain and streaks on the cabinet hinted at an attempt to clean up the aftermath. The scene told a story of panic and delay, of choices made when every second counted. Bonella, we've gone through your apartment, and the evidence doesn't match what you've told us. We need to know the truth, what really happened that day. I didn't think it was that serious. I thought he would wake up. Under questioning, Bonella admitted she had left Christian in charge of his 3 siblings while she went to the bank. When she returned, she found David unresponsive. But instead of calling 911 immediately, she made a fateful decision. Bonella confessed to spending hours online, researching head injuries and possible remedies. She later claimed she was too afraid to contact emergency services, fearing Child Protective Services would intervene and take her children away. You waited hours, Bonella. Hours. David could have been helped. Why didn't you call 911? I was scared. I thought he'd be okay if I just let him rest. Surveillance footage confirmed Bonella's trip to the bank. It also revealed discrepancies in her timeline. By the time she returned home, David had already been injured for hours. Bonella described finding Christian hovering over David's limp body. Instead of calling for help, she changed the toddler's clothes, cleaned up the blood, and placed him back on the bed. Christian, your mom says David fell off the bunk bed. But we need to hear from you, what really happened. Christian's version of events differed from his mother's. He admitted that David had hit his head but insisted it wasn't from a fall. As detectives pressed further, the weight of the truth became too much to bear. I got mad. I didn't mean to hurt him. Christian admitted to shoving David into a bookshelf, He described being overwhelmed by his siblings crying and lashing out in frustration. I just wanted him to stop crying. I didn't know it would hurt him that bad. David's injuries were far worse than anyone had anticipated. His skull was fractured, his nose broken, and his brain swollen from blunt force trauma. The medical team later revealed that had David received immediate care, his life might have been saved. With Bonella's delayed actions and Christian's confession, the case took a darker turn. Investigators now faced a painful reality: David's death could have been prevented if not for the choices made that day. But was Christian entirely to blame? Or had the weight of neglect, trauma, and an impossible burden pushed a 12-year-old to his breaking point? After hours of questioning, the weight of the truth became too much for Christian Fernandez to bear. The 12-year-old, exhausted and emotionally drained, finally broke down. "Christian, we need to know what really happened. You're not alone in this, we're here to help. But you have to be honest with us. I didn't mean to hurt him. I didn't mean to." In a voice barely above a whisper, Christian confessed. The truth he had been holding back was heartbreaking. "I was so mad. I wasn't thinking. He wouldn't stop crying, and I pushed him." Christian admitted to shoving David into a bookshelf, twice. The first push caused the toddler to stumble and hit his head. The second, harder shove sent him crashing against the wooden shelf, leaving him unconscious. "I didn't mean to. I was just so mad, thinking about what my stepdad did to me." Christian's confession revealed more than just the events of that day. It exposed the deep scars left by years of abuse and neglect, a cycle of violence that had shaped his young life and culminated in this tragic act. Haunted by the memories of his stepfather's aggression, Christian struggled to process his emotions. In his frustration, he lashed out at the one person he had been tasked with protecting. Christian's confession left investigators stunned. He was just 12 years old, a child himself, bearing the weight of responsibilities and traumas far beyond his years. "I didn't know it would hurt him that bad. I just wanted him to stop crying." But the reality of what had happened was undeniable. David's injuries, severe blunt force trauma to the head, were the result of Christian's actions, however unintentional they may have been. "Christian, I know you didn't mean for this to happen. But it's important we understand everything. Why did you push him?" "I was just so tired. I couldn't take it anymore. He wouldn't stop crying, and I don't know. I just snapped." Christian's words revealed the crushing weight of his life at home. Left to care for his siblings, struggling with unresolved trauma, and feeling abandoned by the adults around him, he had reached his breaking point. "I didn't want this to happen. I didn't want to hurt him." Christian's voice cracked as he spoke, his guilt and grief pouring out in waves. Despite his actions, it was clear he hadn't fully understood the consequences of his anger. Christian's confession left investigators with a difficult question: how could they hold a 12-year-old accountable for a crime that stemmed from a lifetime of neglect and abuse? Where did the blame truly lie, on the boy, or on the circumstances that had shaped him? The tragedy of David's death was compounded by the tragedy of Christian's life, a child caught in a web of violence and neglect, lashing out in a moment of frustration with irreversible consequences. Christian Fernandez's case sent shockwaves through Florida's criminal justice system. At just 12 years old, he was charged as an adult with first-degree murder, making him the youngest person in the state's history to face such charges. The decision to try Christian as an adult sparked a fierce debate. Many questioned whether a child so young, one shaped by years of abuse and neglect, could truly be held accountable for his actions. Public outcry followed the announcement of the charges. Advocates for juvenile justice reform argued that Christian was a victim of his circumstances, a child failed by every adult in his life. Christian doesn't belong in prison. He belongs in therapy, in a safe environment where he can heal from the trauma he's endured. While Christian's case dominated headlines, attention also turned to his mother, Bonella. She was charged with aggravated manslaughter for her negligence in delaying medical care for David. Bonella pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. However, much of her sentence was suspended, and she was ordered to spend time in a domestic violence shelter in a halfway house as part of her probation. After months of legal battles and mounting public pressure, Christian accepted a plea deal. The first-degree murder charge was reduced to aggravated manslaughter, and he was sentenced to 7 years in juvenile detention. While many saw this as a more compassionate outcome, the sentence still divided public opinion. Some argued that it was a step toward justice, while others believed no child should face such severe punishment for actions rooted in trauma. For 7 years, Christian remained in the juvenile detention system. He was provided therapy and counseling, but the isolation and structure of detention weighed heavily on him. Letters from supporters around the world flooded in, urging Christian to stay strong and reminding him that he was not forgotten. Christian's case became a rallying cry for advocates of juvenile justice reform. Organizations across the country used his story to highlight the flaws in trying children as adults and the need for rehabilitation over incarceration. Christian's story is not unique, it's a tragic reminder of how the system fails vulnerable children. We must do better. While Christian served his time, Bonella completed her sentence in a halfway house. She later spoke publicly about her regrets, acknowledging the choices that had led to her family's downfall. "I failed my children. I should have protected them, all of them. I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life." On his 19th birthday, Christian was released from juvenile detention. He had spent nearly a third of his life behind bars, but he emerged determined to rebuild. Today, Christian lives a quiet life, working as a barber and staying out of the public eye. Though the scars of his past remain, he has taken steps toward healing and moving forward. His story stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and a reminder of the importance of addressing the root causes of violence and trauma, especially in children. The tragedy of David's death left a lasting impact, not just on his family, but on the community and the justice system. It sparked important conversations about accountability, trauma, and the need for systemic change. Christian Fernandez's story is a complex one, filled with pain, loss, and ultimately, hope. It reminds us that even in the darkest moments, there is the potential for change, and the chance to break the cycle of violence for future generations. Released on his 19th birthday, Christian Fernandez stepped into a world vastly different from the one he had known before. 7 years in juvenile detention had shaped him, but they had not defined him. Slowly, Christian began rebuilding his life. Christian found purpose in his work, dedicating himself to a trade that allowed him to start fresh. Though his days were quiet, the echoes of his past remained a constant companion. Christian's story serves as a harrowing reminder of the lasting impact of trauma. From a young age, he was thrust into a cycle of violence and neglect, shouldering burdens no child should ever bear. His actions, though devastating, were rooted in pain he didn't yet know how to process. For Christian and children like him, early intervention could have changed everything. His story underscores the urgent need for systemic reform, better resources for at-risk families, accessible mental health care, and a justice system that prioritizes rehabilitation over punishment. Christian's case ignited conversations about the role of communities in breaking cycles of violence. Programs designed to support struggling families, educate parents, and provide safe spaces for children can be life-changing, preventing tragedies before they occur. Mentorship, advocacy, and early intervention can make the difference between a life derailed by trauma and one filled with opportunity. The tragedy of David's death left an indelible mark on all who knew him. At candlelight vigils and memorials, his family and supporters remembered a bright-eyed toddler whose life ended far too soon. David's memory lives on as a reminder of the fragility of life and the responsibility we all share to protect our most vulnerable. Christian's case became a catalyst for reform. Advocates pushed for changes in how the justice system treats children, emphasizing therapy and education over incarceration. Legislators began drafting bills to ensure that no child would ever face the adult justice system for crimes rooted in trauma. Christian's story shows us the cracks in our system, and the urgency to fix them. We owe it to our children to create a system that heals, not punishes. For Christian, each day is a step forward. His journey is far from over, but he carries with him the lessons of his past and the determination to build a better future. He is not defined by his mistakes but by his resilience, a testament to the human capacity for growth, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Christian's story is a reminder that every child deserves a chance, not just to survive, but to thrive. It calls on us to address the root causes of violence, to nurture instead of punish, and to break the cycles that trap so many in pain and despair. The tragedy of David Galaraga will not be forgotten. It lives on as a call to action, urging us all to do better, for our children, for our families, and for our future.